Olá, daqui Lucas do Fumaça. Em 2024, Joana Teresa Batista e eu estivemos 10 dias na Palestina. Com o objetivo traçado de registar o máximo possível, estabelecemos um plano. Um fotografa, o outro filma. Pelo meio, trocamos. Um apanha sinaléticas da ajuda internacional, o outro câmaras de vigilância, arame farpado, cancelas e checkpoints. De um lado, casas e carros queimados. Do outro, painéis solares destruídos e reservatórios de água furados. Diziam-nos: quando voltarem, contem tudo. É o que temos feito. Há quase 10 anos que a nossa redação se compromete a investigar a ocupação colonial da Palestina. Se achas que este trabalho é importante, ajuda-nos a continuar. Estamos a poucos dias do fim da campanha e quase a chegar às 350 novas pessoas na comunidade Fumaça. Se ainda não fazes parte, faz uma contribuição em fumaca.pt/contribuir. Obrigado.
Olá, daqui Rafaela Cortês. Israel nunca reconheceu o mandato de relator especial das Nações Unidas para os Territórios Palestinianos Ocupados. Esta é uma pessoa especialista, nomeada pelo Conselho de Direitos Humanos da ONU, para investigar e escrever relatórios sobre as violações do direito internacional em Gaza e na Cisjordânia. Estes são os territórios ocupados pelo Estado sionista desde 1967, aquilo que vais ouvir ser referido em inglês como OPT, a sigla para Territórios Palestinianos Ocupados. Este mandato foi criado em 1993 e, na década e meia seguinte, mesmo Israel nunca reconhecendo a legitimidade do seu trabalho, ele foi sendo feito com, pelo menos, uma visita por ano. Até que, em 2008, o Estado proibiu a entrada do relator Richard Falk. O jurista estadunidense tinha apelado aos governos mundiais para que impedissem que, nas suas palavras, as tendências genocidas de Israel culminassem numa tragédia coletiva em Gaza. Disse-o em 2007. Os seus sucessores nunca foram autorizados a entrar. É assim que Francesca Albanese continua a documentar o que se passa nos territórios ocupados, à distância. A jurista italiana, especializada em direito internacional e direitos humanos, é relatora especial da ONU desde 2022. Fiz-lhe esta entrevista há mais de 2 anos, a propósito da série Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina, que te recomendo muito que ouças antes disto. Gravamos em julho de 2023. Meses antes de um ataque armado a Israel, coordenado pelo Hamas, ter justificado uma agressão genocida sobre a faixa de Gaza. Mas esta entrevista, com Francesca Albanese, permite ver como já lá estão todas as formas de opressão que Israel intensificou desde 7 de outubro. A brutalidade sobre os palestinianos, a repressão dos críticos do seu Estado, a campanha planeada e internacionalmente apoiada de limpeza étnica e a impunidade reiterada que permitiu ao Estado israelita enjaular os palestinianos numa prisão a céu aberto. Francesca Albanese não usava, então, esta expressão para se referir apenas a Gaza, mas também à Cisjordânia. Desde que assumiu o mandato, Francesca Albanese tem denunciado a deterioração da situação de direitos humanos na Palestina e violações de lei internacional que assumem várias formas: segregação racial, restrições de movimento, repressão de participação cívica e política, expropriação de terras e propriedades, transferências forçadas, assassinatos, detenções e prisões arbitrárias, incluindo crianças, obstrução da ajuda humanitária, recusa de acesso a recursos naturais, violência por colonos e repressão violenta da resistência popular contra a ocupação. Desde 7 de outubro, a relatora especial da ONU tem vindo a denunciar também a escalada de tortura e maus tratos sistemáticos aos palestinianos nas prisões israelitas. Ao mesmo tempo que impede a entrada da Cruz Vermelha Internacional e observadores independentes nas prisões, Israel mais do que duplicou o número de presos e escalou a violência com que são tratados. Tem detidos mais de 11 mil palestinianos, 1/3 deles sem acusação ou julgamento, 400 menores de idade. É um aumento médio de quase 250 reclusos a cada mês. Tanto Francesca Albanese como o Alto Comissariado das Nações Unidas para os Direitos Humanos têm denunciado a violência lá dentro. A fome intencional, a sobrelotação de celas ao ponto de o ar se tornar rarefeito, a negação de cuidados médicos, produtos de higiene e roupa, a propagação generalizada de sarna em prisões e centros de detenção. Foram documentados vários casos de abuso sexual, violação e tortura de homens e mulheres pelas forças de segurança israelitas. Pelo menos 75 pessoas morreram em cativeiro, incluindo um jovem de 17 anos. 12 delas, provou o Alto Comissariado, foram espancadas ou torturadas antes da morte. Francesca Albanese, com um grupo de outros especialistas, reuniu ainda denúncias de homens prisioneiros de Gaza que sofreram violência física e psicológica extrema. Foram agredidos, algemados com os olhos vendados, obrigados a usar fraldas, contidos em jaulas, privados de cuidados médicos adequados a ponto de sofrer amputações, torturados com choques elétricos e queimaduras de cigarro, privados de água, comida e sono. Francesca Albanese chama a opressão israelita sobre os territórios palestinianos ocupados desde 1967 uma ocupação, um regime de apartheid e um projeto de colonização de povoamento, em que o objetivo é a substituição da população nativa por colonos. Nesta altura, em 2023, tinha esperança de que a ONU reconhecesse em breve a existência desse apartheid, o que nunca aconteceu. Nesta entrevista, fala sobre a responsabilidade política da ONU para com a questão da Palestina e sobre os limites da neutralidade no seu trabalho. Francesca Albanese também chama a agressão do Estado sionista contra Gaza um genocídio, oficialmente desde março de 2024. Em setembro de 2025, devia um comitê de peritos da ONU reconhecer o mesmo. E ainda uma última nota. Vais-nos ouvir falar na UNCCP, sigla em inglês para a Comissão das Nações Unidas de Conciliação para a Palestina. Foi criada em 1948 para resolver o problema político dos refugiados palestinianos sem direito de retorno, a única comissão criada com este objetivo que nunca cumpriu. Hoje é uma agência esvaziada de poder dentro da ONU. E agora sim, fica com a entrevista a Francesca Albanese.
Since May 2022, I am the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territory that Israel has occupied since 1967. This is a very long title. And my mandate, in short, goes as the Special Rapporteur on the OPT, Occupied Palestinian Territories. So my mandate, I'm a human rights lawyer, and so I've been mandated by the Human Rights Council to monitor and carry out investigations on violations of international law in the Gaza Strip, West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and report to the United Nations, so, which I do twice a year, once to the Human Rights Council and once to the General Assembly. Of course, as part of this mandate, I should undertake field visits twice a year, but to the occupied Palestinian territory, which Israel obstructs, unfortunately, in violation of its international obligations as part of the United Nations system. But in the possibility of doing that, I do other things like engaging with civil society as much as I can remotely. And this, for the last report, I've had an incredible exposure to victims, direct and indirect victims of the occupation through virtual tours that both Palestinian and Israeli organizations took me on. And I also receive allegations of serious violations that I take up with the authorities. I engage with them, of course, member states, with the media, with the academia, as constructively as I can. This is what I do as a special rapporteur.
So you've had to conduct these reports from afar, remotely?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And were you expecting this at the beginning of your mandate?
Yes and no, in the sense that Israel has never recognized this mandate, but until 2007, it has not obstructed it. Then, as of 2008, when it arrested and detained Richard Falk, my predecessor's predecessor, then everything has changed, because also the United Nations, instead of resolving the problem, the fact that Israel had blatantly violated an independent expert's privileges and immunities under the international law, it decided, okay, so whenever we go, we need to have a visa. No, this is, that there is this adding problems to problems instead of resolving the root cause, which is being a little bit more robust in defending international law and in upholding legal obligations. The moment you create a loophole and an exception for once, others will abuse and the system and follow suit. So I did know that this was the situation, because since 2007, no special rapporteur has entered the occupied Palestinian territory. But at the same time, I thought, because I know the United Nations system from within, I've worked for the United Nations for 10 years, including 4 years in Geneva and 3 years in Jerusalem. So I thought that I knew the rules well enough to use them to support my visit. And I've tried it and I keep on trying, but there is so little support. Seriously, it's incredible how much impunity one state that violates international law on a daily basis can go away with.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you about that because so last April, 3 former rapporteurs, your predecessors, wrote a letter to publicly defend you against attacks by the Israeli lobby, claiming that during their respective terms as UN special rapporteurs, the UN leadership did not do nearly enough to speak out against the unremitting attacks against us. So you do feel like the UN is not doing enough
Absolutely.
to protect you and to speak out against those attacks?
Absolutely. I do believe, and I resent and I'm concerned about this indifference vis-a-vis reprisals against the special procedures mandate holders, special rapporteurs and other independent experts. Because, well, this mandate has consistently been the target of ad personam or ad hominem attacks. At the same time, it's not the only one. So there are others who experience similar situations. And I do not expect the UN necessarily to fully endorse or fully embrace everything we say. But our function is to be protected. Our function needs to be defended when it comes under attack. Because we do what we do in the exercise of our functions, just discharging a mandate that we were given, and frankly, that we work on for free. So it's our time, our commitment, our dedication, and it's full and very happily given. But at the same time, I want my reputation to be protected. And their silence is interpreted as consent. I'm sorry. I know that. No one in the UN I know, including at the higher level, believes the allegations against me, the accusations. And at the same time, I say, well, say that. It's not enough to express solidarity toward me in an email or shaking hands with me. I don't want this. I don't need this. I want institutional commitment. And the few, I can only think of one. There is one senior UN officer who has steadily and courageously spoken in my defense, has spoken out on the international law violations taking place in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. And I know that I've seen him coming under attack in a no less violent way than myself. So, and we need to use unity as an asset instead of, hiding behind the fingers, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. And do you think that the reason that they don't speak out is because they're trying to protect themselves against these attacks as well?
I don't know. Probably. Look, the thing is that whomever takes a principled stand, because here it's not about being pro-Palestinian or anti-Israelis. I have a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians because they are really victimized and brutalized, but not only by Israel, also in a significant way by the international community who doesn't stand up for the application of international law in just a pure and objective way, but also to an extent the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian authorities, because as I've analyzed in my report, my most recent report, to an extent I recognize that they are not free, they operate in captivity, and the occupation doesn't leave them space to rule, to govern over the territory. But at the same time, they do add a layer of repression over their people, and this doubles the frustration that the Palestinians experience under confinement as they are.
Yeah, so different layers of oppression.
Absolutely. So in this context, there are it's very sensitive to take a stand on the situation. Those who do get immediately slandered as anti-Semite, as supporting terrorism and supporting violence. And you can see the last in the longest list is the UN Secretary General. I'm so glad that when he came under attack a couple of days ago for having just condemned excessive use of force, which is not only, it's evident there is excessive use of force, because it's unclear why in Jenin, the Israeli army had to damage 80% of the houses, had to destroy roads, the attack, civil infrastructure, target hospitals, target journalists. Why so? And the damage is incommensurable. And it's like it has been such a wild storm. And I've analyzed with other special rapporteurs what are the evidence, what we had, the video footage of what was happening. We have collected testimonies, we have received allegations, we have consulted with independent, with UN and other actors on the ground, and we have concluded that prima facie Israel has committed war crimes. In the face of it, the Secretary General says it's excessive use of force, at least. And he comes under attack for his words. So he is not backtracked, and I'm very happy he didn't. But this is not everyone has the time and the stamina and the moral courage to face the smear, because I can tell you by personal experience, it's draining.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, but it definitely sounds terrible. And what do you think is the goal behind this campaign? Is it to silence you?
Of course, yes. To silence me, but it's more than that. It's not just to silence me. It's very clear that they want me removed from this mandate. Because, and I don't want to sound like arrogant, but because I think that I'm really managing to hit the nail on the head, and I touch the critical issues, and I bring international law to the fore, and I connect the facts with the legal analysis in a way that it's not common, simply because not many people know the history of the Palestinian question, which I know through the lens of the refugees, which is a topic I've engaged with for years, both as a UN as a UN professional and as a scholar, and it remains in my veins to look at those issues from an factual and historical perspective. So, and also, I'm not someone who's not easily. The second element is that by personality, I'm not easily intimidated. So it was interesting because recently The Guardian quoted me saying something that I really threw out there, but it's true. I mean, I really think that most of these pro-Israel lobby groups, these pro-Israel groups are just dogs barking at an airplane. And sometimes I do not even pay attention. Seriously, I'm not making it up. I don't pay attention because I don't have the time. I'm really focused. I have a people-centered approach. And I look at states. So I get furious when I see that states do not engage with the substance of my reports and my conclusions and recommendations, and just shout out criticism that is not supported by evidence. I can make mistakes. I'm not saying that. I'm not defending myself a priori. It's just that I want to be challenged on the substance, not on what they think that I think. But I also have to say that I see increasingly support from member states, including states who are not normally vocal. So I cannot point to many states have stood against my mandate and my persona. I have a lot of solidarity, so this is what matters. Of course, in addition to what comes from civil society worldwide.
Yeah, I actually, that was exactly what I wanted to talk to you about next, which is concerning your findings in the reports. I wanted to ask you, what did you find? I'm sure I've read a bit of the reports, and obviously we don't really have the time to go into all of it here. But I wanted to ask you about your conclusions, and especially given what you were also saying about the states, because the reports are supposed to create some sort of impact. So, what do you think the impact will be on these reports, and if you think your findings are exactly like news to the Human Rights Council or to these member states of the European Union, for example?
Yes and no, in the sense, look, I decided, and I will try to be brief, sorry, I but look, the question is that arbitrary deprivation of liberty is absolutely not new. To the civil society, to the human rights community, because of the magnitude of the phenomenon. I mean, almost 1 million Palestinians have been arrested in 56 years, at least once, including 13,000 kids from the 2000 onward, which is when they started to collect systematically the figures. The gravity of the violations against detainees and prisoners, especially children as young as 12, is monumental. And so this is not new, but there are two things that are new. On the one hand, I linked the legal grounds that Israel uses for this mass incarceration policy. And I show that although there are Palestinians who commit acts of violence that need to be investigated, prosecuted, and made accountable, and the Palestinians need to be made accountable for. The majority of the Palestinians are incarcerated because of, in the exercise of fundamental rights, because if you read my analysis is very, very simple of the legal grounds. It shows that Palestinians are detained for expressing opinions, for gathering, for pronouncing unauthorized political speeches, or even for attempting to do so. So they are deprived of their status of protected civilians because Israel presumes them guilty without evidence, arrests them without warrants, detains them without charge or trial. And they are brutalized. Palestinians are brutalized in Israeli custody, no matter the age, no matter the gender. Actually, age and gender become two vulnerability factors that are exploited. And this is so violent. But the other element that these on the one hand undermines the claim of Israel does it for its security. No, it does it for the security of its annexation plan in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, because it's demonstrated, and there is ample evidence, that the majority of arrest and detention happens in the proximity of settlements, where it's normal that there is tension, but not just tension. It's because the Palestinians want to access their lands. The Palestinians need to cross lands that has been taken by the settlers or by the military to go to school, to go to the hospital. So, this situation shows the connection between arbitrary deprivation of liberty and the colonization process. So the fact that Israel confuses its security with the security of its settlement expansion. But the second and last element is that I said it's an open-air prison. Israel has morphed the occupied Palestinian territory into an open-air prison. Why? It doesn't even need to incarcerate people on a mass scale, as it used to do during the first Intifada, 100,000 people, the second Intifada, 70,000 people. slowly but gradually, think of the settlements, the walls, the segregated roads, the thousands of checkpoints. So these are physical barriers that constrain and confine the Palestinians in pockets. This is an archipelago, and it's a carceral archipelago because it's constantly surveilled through thousands of CCTV cameras, and which are also the place for collection of biometric information. And also every settler has these applications, Blue Wolf, White Wolf, connected to the Red Wolf pack. There is automated apartheid reported that Amnesty International produced. So you see, and on top of it, there are, permits, and the Palestinians need to ask to build, to go to school, to access a given area, to move in and out from their communities. What is this? And these practices are very common of the settler colonial history. So in this sense, yes, this is new. Again, people are now understanding another layer of operation that Israel relies on to deal with the Palestinians.
Thank you. Yeah. So you mentioned Amnesty International and the report they did on apartheid. Does UN call the reality in Palestine apartheid? Do you think that could be one of the outcomes of your reporting, for example?
But this is my departure. I mean, I do not expect to write a new report on apartheid per se, because Michael Link has written his last report on apartheid, and I fully support his analysis and findings, which, by the way, builds on decades of denunciation and evidence provided by Palestinian human rights organizations, which have also been corroborated and added on by Israeli and international organizations. So I particularly commend Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International for their incredibly detailed analysis, well-documented, solid analysis of the apartheid regime. I don't think, frankly, the South African apartheid regime was not as well documented as the one that Israel imposes on the Palestinians. So it's also in a way contributing to show how the crime of apartheid can be committed elsewhere than South Africa. But if even the South Africa, who I think own a particular historical relationship with this awful term, which corresponds to an awful, even more awful experience. They say, those who have traveled through the occupied Palestinian territories say, oh my God, this is worse than what we have faced. We should believe them. So, for me, it's apartheid by default. It couldn't be anything else, because the moment you have one people in power, guided by the intent to subjugate, to dominate another people, and committing widespread and systematic violation of international law as part of this plan, this is apartheid.
And do you think the UN is on its way to recognize it as such publicly?
I hope so. I'm probably not yet, but the tide is changing. This is what I see. And there are more member states within the UN that use the term apartheid. And I think
settler colonialism as well.
Yeah, it's not obvious, because there is, there are many Israeli Jews or many Jewish people who feel extremely offended by the use of settler colonialism. Because they have an historical tie. Surely they are not the French colonizing or bringing their settlers to to Algeria, for example, or is not the Europeans colonizing the Americas or Australia or New Zealand. Is another kind of thing. But you do not need to have a perfect analogy in order to commit the same commit a given international law violation. I've analyzed, I say that it's settler, the occupation in a 1967 territory settler colonial, because it violates fundamentally the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people through violation of territorial sovereignty and integrity, violation of economic sovereignty, suppression of political activities and others, and annihilation of the cultural existence of the Palestinian people. I mean, they're really after a de-Palestinization of the territory. This is why I say settler colonial, because there is the intent to displace the Palestinian natives and replace them with settlers.
Yes. When we went to Palestine last year, we interviewed the previous director of Amnesty in the Palestinian branch in Ramallah. He told us that when they were producing the report that became the report denouncing the crimes of apartheid, which was a process that lasted 4 years, they got a lot of pushback, not just from Israeli organizations and lobby, but even within Amnesty International, within the same organization. So, did that happen to you during your last year as you were producing the reports? Did you get pushback from either member states or institutions or even within the UN?
For using the word apartheid, you mean?
Not necessarily for using the word apartheid, but in doing your report and in being vocal about the issues that you've described. But it can also be about the word apartheid.
Look, a little bit, in the sense that Israel, of course, Israel has always opposed this mandate and my persona in particular. And also the United States have been, the U.S. administration has not really been proactive with me in engaging, but also not supportive. There have been, I wouldn't even say the U.S. administration, because I've met with some U.S. official, and we have had as one of them commented, we had such a civilized encounter. Yeah, of course, what would you expect?
So the Code of Conduct for Special Procedures mandate holders of the Human Rights Council stresses the importance of ensuring universality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in the consideration of human rights issue, and claims that the work of the Council shall be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. What do neutrality and impartiality mean, especially when applied to the context of Palestine? Is it possible to be neutral?
I think that the emphasis should be on impartiality and objectivity. And it's something I really put a lot of effort on, because I know that whatever I do and say, everything I do and say will be scrutinized and to the limit, to find some flaws or some faults. So I go the extra mile to do that. But where do I put objectivity and impartiality as a top priority, really at the top of my list? As I listen to people, as I engage with stakeholders, as I analyze what's happening on the ground, as I collect information and, to an extent, evidence to see if the allegations I received can be supported and are worth of my engagement and action. I do look at facts impartially and objectively, and I do my best to apply international law impartially and objectively. But once I've done that, it's not up to me to be equidistant from the parties or make sure that I bash everyone with the same intensity or I praise everyone with the same intensity, if you see what I mean. I need to state the facts for how I have examined them, and more importantly, I need to state the norms. So people tend to confuse. First of all, again, neutrality is not necessary. It has a very specific meaning, but the values that are quintessential to our mandates are objectivity and independence and integrity. And frankly, I think that this mandate cannot be substantively and credibly challenged on the ground of biases, because the fact is that the violations the Palestinians as a people endure are so blatant and so evident, so apparent, that it's clear that international law calls for a correction of the current situation, and first and foremost with a dramatic change of performance by Israel.
Yeah, and at one point when we're talking about an occupation, if you're being neutral on a subject, it just means you're supporting the status quo, which is not being neutral. Or don't you agree?
Look, as a human rights lawyer, I see your point. As a human rights lawyer and as someone who chooses, as I said before, a people-centered approach, I'm obliged to listen to the victims of human rights violations, whomever they are, and to make sure that their voice is heard. I've been very, very careful to capture. I mean, this comes with nuances, and this is why since the very beginning, if you remember my first report, since the very beginning I've said this is not an intractable conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians, the Jews as Jewish people around the world, or not even between the Israelis and the Palestinians, let alone because 20% of Israelis are Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. And there are so many Israeli Jews, so many Israelis who are against what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. They're not enough. But this in any case doesn't change my position. I speak from a place of compassion, and there is no judgment whatsoever. I really try to. This is why I keep on learning also about the perspective that many Jews, many progressive Jewish groups are sharing with me, not necessarily because they endorse their fellow citizens' positions, but because I now understand much better the kind of struggle that an average Israeli or an average Jewish person in Europe, for example, has vis-a-vis this question, because they love Israel. Most of them love Israel, and this is something that I do not allow myself to question. The thing is that Israel needs to comply with international law without discrimination, without distinction, like any other state. So, and this is my point, and I do appreciate, and I have a lot of sympathy for, including Israelis who struggle with it. But I'm nowhere here to judge. I'm here to help, also people to encounter on a ground which is only where human rights should be acknowledged and respected by both. And there is no attempt to normalize the situation, but just to say, ultimately, this is the goal.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to touch a bit on international law. Black queer feminist poet and writer and civil rights activist Audre Lorde said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And I mean, the right to self-determination has been protected under international law for decades, but it hasn't been much help to the Palestinians for the past 75 years. Is international law one of the master's tools? And do you think there is any hope in international law for the Palestinians?
You mentioned self-determination has been protected for decades. I don't necessarily agree, in the sense that self-determination is one of those provisions who keep on being referred to, but very rhetorically, and in a way that empties the norm of its meaning. And this is why I started my work as a special rapporteur focusing on what it means, self-determination, and unpacking it for really the general public. Because it's a pretty complex right, and even lawyers, sometimes not specialized lawyers, struggle with. And it has a very special meaning to the Palestinian people. It's absolutely unrealized, and there is no way to realize it if the situation continues to spiral down as it's doing. Can international law be a fixer? Yes, I think so, but it really depends, because eventually, look, international law is a neutral tool that can be used in various ways. Because most of it eventually is interpretation and application. But human rights norms are different. Human rights law has formed because of the push of the people. Human rights law was not, did not translate into treaties because states decided to protect the individual. No, this was the end, and it continues to be the result of civil society achievements, women rights struggle, worker rights struggle, anti-slavery movement, anti-segregation, anti-apartheid movements. This is anti-colonization movements. This is how human rights law has formed. And it has been recognized at a very specific moment after the Second World War and in the first decades after it, because states recognized the importance of giving protection to individuals, as they had done after the First World War, recognizing the protection of minorities. So these are conquests. These are conquests and should be treasured, and we should keep on finding out the full meaning and letting it blossom. If you see what I mean, it's not. It's a continuous struggle. But it's for good causes.
Yes. But now I'm wondering, what do you think the role of the UN is in the Palestinian question if we're talking about grassroots organizing and movements and building things from the bottom up? Because, for example, since 1947, the United Nations has issued over 100 resolutions regarding the Palestinian question, calling, for example, for the right for refugees to return, condemning Israel attacks, calling for the end of Israeli settlement building, strongly requesting Israel to abide by the Fourth Geneva Convention, etc., etc., etc. So after all these years, do you believe the UN has any power to help to fix this Palestinian question? And also, what do you think is the role of the UN here?
Eventually, the UN is a governmental organization representing and consisting of states. So once I've heard someone saying that international law is a toothless tool in the hands of the powerless. And I think that the United Nations needs to prove this statement wrong. So international law is as strong as the will of states to uphold it, to enforce it. So to go back to your original point in the question, what is the role of the United Nations on the question of Palestine? The question of Palestine is a permanent responsibility of the United Nations, and this is by determination of General Assembly. And there is a Canadian scholar, Professor Ardim Sayes, who's done brilliant work in investigating this and the question of Palestine within the UN for over 75 years. So what this contribution exposes is that the commitment to Palestine, Palestinian refugees, self-determination, and the condemnation of the settlements and the occupation, etc., has been high in rhetoric and very poor in practice. Why so? Because the UN Security Council, which is the UN body mandated to enforce, to take decision on countermeasures. So every time there is a violation international wrongdoing that might compromise peace and stability, there are measures that the UN can and should take. There can be coercive measures that entail political, diplomatic, economic responses, changes or sanctions, or there might be the use of force. This is the range of measures that the UN Charter affords. I think it's time for the United Nations to really consider the full meaning and the legal consequences of Israel's protracted violations of international law and protracted impunity, which breeds impunity, in fact, through recourse to diplomatic, economic and political measures. And this is something that, of course, collectively the United Nations can do through the Security Council. But if the Security Council doesn't act because there is some state vetoing the resolutions, well, individual states or groups of states can take measures. So this is what state responsibilities entails. My fear is that everyone's responsibility becomes no one's responsibility, and everyone is hiding behind the other. Yeah, but the international. It blows my mind when I hear people saying, "Oh, but states saying, oh, the international community should do this and that." Well, what does your state do to ensure this? Show me. You need to have your house in order before, blaming others. This is my motto, and therefore I keep on reminding states before coming here and venting about what this entity, this abstract entity, does and doesn't. Show me what you do and you don't. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, despite the growing acknowledgement of the oppression of Palestinians on an international level, this hasn't necessarily led to major political changes or pressures from the international community. Why do you think that is?
I think that it's a mix of, it's a combination of factors, and there are there are strong geopolitical interests, and also this is probably the result of Israel has been very strategic in building strong alliances with a number of states, and there is a natural sense of proximity that Western countries have, because this is eventually the Western countries have with Israel. But also Israel has been quite strategic in building economic relations and also developing a critical expertise, for example, in artificial intelligence and technologies, surveillance methods, and military its military apparatus is enforced on the Palestinians, but its military regime is enforced on the Palestinians, but its techniques are being exported to other states. So there are a number of ties that now make Israel very close to many states that do not necessarily probably feel comfortable at taking a stand against it. So yeah, I understand, but where is this heading to? And I do think that it's having a detrimental impact both on the Israelis and the Palestinians, clearly on the Palestinians, but also on the Israelis. And ultimately, it weakens us all, because as I was saying before, this creating double standards, exceptionalism has a price. It comes with a cost. What is the cost of this political alliance and the strings attached to it? It's weakening the system, because it's very hard to defend international law that is now universally applied, and it's only applied to those who are not considered friends, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of strings attached, one of our the focuses of our investigation has been on the conditions, the political conditions that are attached to international aid, and it has been highly criticized by Palestinian activists and civil society organizations, claiming that these conditions have consequences, for example, in terms of reframing the Palestinian question as a humanitarian problem and not a political one, in terms of repressing forms of resistance by criminalizing, for example, BDS, or branding civil society organizations as terrorists, in terms of promoting normalization of the occupation through the promotion of people-to-people, joint Israeli and Palestinian projects, or even creating donor-driven organizations that, instead of working towards the goals of the Palestinians, spend countless resources in trying to win project grants for example, the climate crisis or women's empowerment or whatever the EU's goals are that year. Is politically conditioned funding undermining the Palestinian struggle for self-determination?
I think it depends, but to the extent I know it, yes, because frankly, it's there is a confusion between, for example, there is an assumption that no aid should be used for supporting terrorism. But the point is, we cannot let Israel define what is terrorism through its occupation apparatus, because Israel considers terrorist and hostile a number of conducts that are devoid of offensiveness under international law. On the contrary, they represent the free exercise, the exercise of fundamental freedoms and rights. So, as I say, I think that conditionality with human rights organization is not acceptable. You can decide whether to fund or not an organization, but you shouldn't try to condition its functions, especially in a case where the Palestinians are fully deprived of the right of self-determination, and political activities are also an expression of fundamental rights and freedoms. So asking the Palestinians not to take political stance, excuse me, why? Which is different from engaging in violent acts, which I understand. I would support that, but not. What is done is a bit more subtle and invasive than that.
Yeah, not to mention that since the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993, around $50 billion of international aid has flowed into Palestine, which makes it one of the highest per capita recipients of non-military aid in the world. And despite all this aid, some socioeconomic indicators like the unemployment rate, extreme poverty, and food security have actually worsened in that period. And of course, none of it has brought Palestinians any closer to self-determination. So it makes you wonder, what has all this aid achieved?
I don't think I'm the best person to address that question, because I have the same criticism. So yeah. I agree.
Okay. I wanted to move on to talk about your experience at UNRWA and your experience with the refugee question, because this reporting actually started when my colleagues went to Palestine in 2017, and while they were there, Palestinian activist Dawood Amoudeh, the program manager at the American Friends Service Committee, and is also a member of the Stop the Wall campaign, he told us that the food baskets provided by UNRWA were mostly made up with imported products, and that people in refugee camps, and I'm quoting, fry eggs with imported sunflower oil, even though there's no such oil production in Palestine, while olive oil is widely available. We've heard many criticisms since then that denounce huge salary disparities between local employees and foreign workers, and that, for example, Palestinian workers cannot rise through the ranks of the organization. We've also heard that at UNRWA schools, they can't teach the kids about the Nakba or have Palestinian history in the curriculum, and that the teachers have been investigated and fired for taking pro-Palestinian stances in social media. Is UNRWA perpetuating the status quo?
No, I don't think that UNRWA is perpetuating the status quo, but clearly UNRWA is not necessarily making the situation of Palestinian refugees easier. And again, there are issues that have often presented with at the managerial level, but I also think that UNRWA as an agency is under enormous pressure. It has always been, and since the past, in the last 15, 20 years, it has been relentless. So there is an interest, on the one hand, to keep the services that UNRWA provides alive. On the other hand, to eliminate any possibility and any confusion with a possible political function that UNRWA might assume. So UNRWA in reaction, and this is my interpretation, this is something not necessarily said or observed as a UN Special Rapporteur, because I've not dealt with it, but looking at what I used to do in my previous incarnation, this has pushed UNRWA in a sort of a defensive corner, protecting its humanitarian work, while I think that UNRWA's mandate is much broader than that.
I wanted to ask if you think there is an active goal towards the disinvestment in UNRWA.
The dismissal.
Yes, exactly.
Of the agency.
Exactly. And since that is tied so much, UNRWA is tied so much to the right of return, if that disinvestment is a threat to the right of return?
Well, the thing is that, as I said, on the question of Palestine falls in the remit of the United Nations. The United Nations cannot get rid of it. Now, UNRWA is the last remnant of the international institutional response that the United Nations have given to the question of Palestine, because there was a UN mediator who was killed, and then, there was a substitute, and then there was a UN Conciliation Commission for Palestine created through Resolution 194, which worked together with UNRWA. And for the refugees, the critical institutional mandates are UNRWA, but also the UNCCP. The UNCCP has been dismissed, so its budget was cancelled, and therefore it's in a sort of pharmacological coma, in the sense it exists, but it doesn't operate anymore. And so this is why I say UNRWA is the remnant of a system that is delivering incomplete functions, is delivering absolutely incomplete protection, is not delivering protection at all, as far as I'm concerned, as an independent expert from outside, and because the Palestinian refugees lack protection, looking particularly at those under Israel's occupation. 75% of the Palestinians in Gaza, just to stay to the OPT, 75% of the Palestinians in Gaza are refugees from 1947, 1949. And 40% of those in the West Bank, I'm not quite sure now, those in Jerusalem, but this is a huge proportion of the population under occupation, which is still refugees, and they should have international protection. Do they? They don't. So, and also the assistance is inadequate. So I do think that defunding UNRWA would be a huge betrayal to the mandate that the UN had set for the question of Palestine and the Palestinian refugees. So this is the critical point now, that UNRWA could deliver its mandate differently, more effectively, better. To an extent, I tend to agree. I have made my own remarks, observations, which are public. At the same time, I think that the United Nations cannot simply not the United Nations. Some member states cannot advocate for the defunding of UNRWA because UNRWA is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly. It depends on the General Assembly. And I don't think that the funding can happen without consequences, without really revolutionizing the system, the institutional asset. But at the same time, do we want the situation to stay as is? No, because it's not effective. So a conversation should take place on what is needed to make the situation better, to alleviate the pressure on the refugees, on the host states, and to comply with international law.
And now, just to touch a little bit on what you said at the beginning about the aid work industry. So you have extensive knowledge about the area, even though you're not permitted to enter. But I wanted to ask, because you had meetings, I'm sure, during your procedure with leaders from civil rights organizations and local NGOs. And I wanted to ask, how are they acting in the ground as part of this equation and aid work industry? What sort of leverage do they have, and what's your experience in this particular issue?
Well, and this is very interesting because I think I do like the expression you use, NGOization, because it has happened. I was mentioning yesterday in an event that I've never seen so many organizations, both development and humanitarians, operating in the OPT, and it has this aid influx has created also or has helped a number of local organizations to germinate. These overlaps with historical organizations that have operated in the occupied Palestinian territory. Quite astonishing. You had, for example, organizations like Al-Haq doing human rights work while everyone was talking about international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions. And so the point was, well, yeah, but why do you look at international human rights law? So they've been really visionary and forward-looking. So there is, and in a way, Al-Haq epitomizes a reality that resonates with what I was saying before about human rights law is the achievement of the people. In many respects, the discourse around international law violations, the exposure of international law violations in the occupied Palestinian territory is largely due to the incredible commitment and good quality work that these organizations, largely Palestinians, but also Israelis and increasingly Israelis, have done or are doing. Now, how does it relate, if any, with this overstructure of others coming from outside? The dynamics could be several. I think there is competition for funds, although I do see an effort of developmental and humanitarian actors not to bypass, not to overstep Palestinian organizations at large. Plus, I'm not on the ground, so I cannot be 100% sure of the accuracy of what I'm saying. But this is my impression from outside. At the same time, where I think that is the problem is that there are two problems. One is that this significant presence of internationals, for example, gives the states an alibi, because through humanitarian aid or through development aid, they support the Palestinian people, and that's all. So humanitarianism or aid in general cannot be a long-term strategy. Can emerge. This is especially humanitarian aid is meaningful. If it's a response to an emergency, but it cannot be a strategy to handle a situation in perpetuity. Otherwise, it becomes, as I said recently, Band-Aid aid, and becomes an alternative to the political solution, or an alternative to the political solution, which is due to a deeply rooted political problem that lacks compliance with international law. In this sense, humanitarianism, if it's abused, betrays its objective, its aim. And again, I'm also very much against the second risk that I see. It's the fragmentation of let's say, the fragmentation of the international protection function, that of course has assistance component, but you cannot intervene on certain groups or certain rights, forgetting the overarching issues. And this is what has happened over the past 30 years, that you have had mushrooming of organizations being there, but then normalizing the occupation, not standing against, not taking a stand, and not even criticizing, but not even analyzing the overall occupation, but just moving within the margins or within the interstices that it has left, which I find nonsensical in the long term.
Acabaste de ouvir uma entrevista com Francesca Albanese, a relatora especial da ONU para os Territórios Palestinianos Ocupados, gravada em julho de 2023 durante a produção da série Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina. Esta entrevista foi feita por mim, Rafaela Cortês. A Margarida David Cardoso cortou-a e escreveu isto que te estou a ler. O Bernardo Afonso editou o som. A Joana Teresa Batista fez a identidade gráfica. O Lucas Grimaldo Freitas a estratégia de comunicação. O Fred Rocha tratou do website. Consultem em fmaca.pt a série completa, várias outras entrevistas, visualizações de dados e uma enorme lista de livros, filmes e podcasts que nos foram úteis nesta investigação. Fazem ainda parte da equipa Fumaça António Assunção, Luís Marquês, Maria Almeida, Bruno Viegas e Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro. Até já!